BG in the house. Hope everyone's doing well, guys. Once again, the topic of PEDs has hit the forefront of boxing, specifically heavyweight boxing. I guess you could say it has reared its proverbial ugly head, and unfortunately, this is a topic that comes up more and more and more and more often in the sport of boxing, heavyweight boxing most regularly, but in all divisions, time and time again. Um, I've got a few thoughts actually on some of the recent performance enhancing drugs issues that have come up. Now, historically on my channel, I haven't been the loudest about performance enhancing drugs. I've always been someone who's kind of believed in innocent until proven guilty, and I've tried not to be the sort of person who's come on board and gone onto YouTube and accused a load of fighters of taking drug A or taking drug B when I've got very, very little evidence. You won't see videos on my channel saying, that I suspect this fighter is taking drugs, unless there's been some sort of report as such, or unless there's been, a failed test or something of that nature. But I do have opinion on some of the recent stories. So let's start with the Luis Ortiz versus Deontay Wilder fight. First and foremost, let me say, I've seen conflicting reports on whether this fight will go ahead or not. I suspect it will not, and the more recent reports I've seen are implying that the fight will not happen. I think it really, really should not happen. It really, really should not happen for two reasons. Number one, it sets a real ugly look for world boxing, and for me, it's very damaging to the global reputation of boxing if we allow someone to fight for the WBC heavyweight title, probably the most prized title in the sport of boxing, when they fail the drug test. Now, I understand Team Ortiz is saying, some sort of heart medication that's caused the failure, etc. Regardless of that, if we're having drug tests and if people are failing them, let's say there's a reason we have these tests, you're not fighting, and it's a real bad look for the sport. The fight I covered before, I think it was the Povetkin Depar fight, and for me that goes down as one of the ugliest incidents in the sport, where Povetkin had failed some sort of drug test. I appreciate there's some people who are now coming out saying Povetkin was innocent, whatever. At the time, there was a big cloud over Povetkin's name. He fought anyway, and he won against a late notice opponent by chilling knockout. For me, one of the worst looks that boxing has had, and one of the worst ways of damaging the sport in terms of its reputation, its potential for sponsorship, etc. This would eclipse this for me. Even if Luis Ortiz did only make a little mistake, even if Luis Ortiz is just on some blood pressure medication, for him to fail a test and then to fight for the WBC title would be scandalous. And I, for one, sincerely hope that fight does not happen. Ortiz's management, I've seen them on Twitter coming out saying that Luis Ortiz is owed an apology, that the drug testing body were too quick to publish the results, and that little did they know that Luis Ortiz is actually on medication for taking blood pressure related medicine. Well, I'm afraid the management of Luis Ortiz, in my opinion, has made a very, very bad miscalculation with that. Luis Ortiz, for my money, is certainly not owed an apology. Whether Luis Ortiz has knowingly taken performance enhancing drugs or not, it is completely and utterly his fault for not declaring that he was taking this medication and not letting the relevant bodies know, especially an individual like Luis Ortiz, who already has something of a cloud over his head given previous history with performance enhancing drugs tests. For him not to be cognizant of that fact, and for him not to be declaring this medication, was a critical error made by him or by his team. And whether or not Luis Ortiz now faces a lengthy ban, he's certainly not owed an apology, and he certainly shouldn't be allowed to take this fight, given the damage it would really do for boxing, in my opinion, if it were to continue. Now, Ortiz, having now failed tests on multiple occasions, and being certainly suspicious in terms of the way his excuses have come out. I'm highly skeptical of him as an individual. There's some people who will say there's no smoke without fire. There's some people who will say, um, that these mistakes happen. I'm not gonna necessarily come on here and completely trash him and throw him under the bus because I don't know the full facts. I'm not in receipt of those full facts. But what I can say is, with the doubt surrounding his name, certainly no apologies are owed, in my opinion, and certainly he shouldn't be fighting for that belt. And if Deontay Wilder were to fight him, and if Deontay Wilder were to lose that fight, that would be an incredibly bad look for boxing. Would we say that Deontay Wilder didn't actually lose that fight because he's been in with a drug cheat? I saw Dave Allen on Twitter, and Dave Allen was tweeting that he still feels pain every day from the injury he suffered at the hands of Luis Ortiz from a laceration to his tongue. Um, you got to say Dave Allen has a real right to feel aggrieved. He went in there for low to medium money. He stood in front of that man and he took a beating round after round after round. Dave Allen's a very tough man, but this is a sport of boxing. He could have died in the ring that night. And he was doing that against an individual who has failed the drug test on multiple occasions. He has a right to feel aggrieved, very much so. And whether or not Ortiz has knowingly looked to take performance-enhancing drugs, it is still a terrible failing on his behalf not to have let the relevant bodies know that he had these drugs in his system. Now, we go from one end of the spectrum to the other. I was perplexed by an interview that I watched this morning on IFL TV, starring none other than Tony Bomber Bellew. Where Tony Bellew was complaining, and I hope I haven't misunderstood this, but Tony Bellew appeared to be complaining that the website for the UK doping board, the UK body that looks after these tests, seemed not to be working. And Tony Bellew seemed to be implying, and you can go on if you want the verbatim quote, you can go on to the IFL TV interview and see it. Tony Bellew seemed to be implying that the technology that the governing body, that the relevant body were employing was not compatible with Apple if you were using an Apple laptop. Now in this day and age, how can it be that you need a specific type of laptop to use the website? How can we really hold these fighters to account if it's the case that you can only declare yourself, and tell the body where you are for drug testing if you are using a specific type of laptop? How can the website be that bad? This is a scandal. This is an absolute scandal. The interviewer then went on to say to Tony Bellew, Dave Allen mentioned that he's only been tested once in the last 2 years, and Bellew seemed to imply that you only get tested if you're ranked as like a top 20 boxer in Britain. I'm sure this is written somewhere, I'm sure we can research that on the internet, but can this really be right? That you only get drug tested with any sort of regularity if you're classed as a top 30 or 20 or top 15 fighter? If that's the case, then frankly it's ludicrous. Someone getting beaten to death by an opponent on steroids at British title level or Southern Area title level is just as bad for my money as someone falling victim to a similar fate at world title level. Similarly, I'd ask the question, how does anyone become a top 20 fighter in the UK? Well, the way you become a top 20 fighter is by beating someone at top 100 level and by beating someone at top 50 level. So you can only become a top 20 fighter through working your way up those ranks. So, it seems absolutely bizarre to me if you're only getting tested in Britain if you're at a sort of elite level. But to become an elite level fighter, you don't need to be tested. And a guy like Dave Allen, who's been in major fights now, the guy's fought against Dillian White, the guy's fought against Luis Ortiz. He's been tested once in 2 years. Then you've got a guy like Tony Bellew, who cannot actually let the drug testers know where he's staying without purchasing a new laptop. I mean, if this is true, it beggars belief. Beggars belief for my money. Um, you've got the Tyson Fury mess. You know, Fury victim to an extended absence from the ring. Now, there's obviously other circumstances there, but Fury victim to extended absence from the ring. And then he comes on Twitter and suddenly out of nowhere he's been cleared. You know, how does that work? How does that work? I saw Eddie Hearn on IFL saying that not all is what it seems with that situation. Because if Fury was one of his fighters, he'd be taking legal action against UCAS. And I suspect that not all is as it seems. You know, what's been going on there is obviously a highly complicated scenario. And I don't know if we'll ever have full visibility on that. And as I've said before on this channel, visibility is a key word. You know, it's the lack of visibility. When you have a lack of visibility in any sort of business, usually it leads to scandal. When there's so much smoke and mirrors, the lack of visibility here seems absolutely crazy, and it really means that even people inside boxing, don't really have a clue what is going on. We've now got Tyson Fury and Shannon Briggs talking about a fight. Well, last I heard, you know, Tyson Fury was banned as recently as a few days ago and was due some hearing that may not take place till 2018. And I believe Shannon Briggs had also failed a drugs test, and now the two are looking to potentially face off. People asking me for the record, what's my opinion on that fight? Well, my opinion is actually a sensible level for Fury to come back at. Fury, if he is going to come back, and I'm still sceptical of that. I've said that he's going to be a long way off the level he was when he fought Vladimir Klitschko. He's done, in my opinion, a lot of damage to his career and to his health for being so overweight for such an extended period of time. I do believe he can lose the weight. He's shown a propensity to lose weight quickly and get in shape effectively in the past. But this has been an extended period of time, and Fury's getting older. And as you get older, your body starts to change, your metabolism starts to slow, etc. And Shannon Briggs, that's the right kind of comeback opponent. And who knows? Briggs must be in his mid-40s now. And as I say, Briggs' recent comeback run when he was calling out David Haye, seemingly that was fueled by some sort of performance-enhancing drugs, as he's failed some sort of test. So, Briggs didn't look very handy even in that comeback. Maybe he'll be even less of a fighter if he's now off the performance enhancing drugs. So potentially that's quite easy work for Tyson Fury. Stay away from Briggs's power for a round or two, and then school him from range. You would assume that would be well within the capability of a guy like Tyson Fury. But where does this leave Deontay Wilder? I pity Deontay Wilder. I do. I feel bad for him. The amount of issues that guy has had with performance-enhancing drugs, be it, I think he was fighting a guy, I won't pronounce the fighter's name because I don't want to call out the wrong guy on my channel for taking performance-enhancing drugs. But there was obviously the Povetkin saga, and I understand there's still controversy there, but there was the Povetkin saga, and let's say there was at least substantial question as to, whether Povetkin had failed the test. You've had the Luis Ortiz saga, and there was another saga as well with the fighter whose name I can't remember, so I'm not going to guess at it. But all sorts of delays, and now Deontay Wilder's left with another late notice opponent, and it looks like it's going to be Stiverne. And Stiverne's another guy who historically has had some sort of question attached to his name, although for whatever reason he seems to be cleared of that. So Wilder's going in against Stiverne, so it appears, or maybe he'll go in against Brazil. Wilder-Stiverne, really not the rematch that any of us boxing fans wanted to see. People asking for my opinion on that fight. Well, Wilder handled Stiverne with consummate ease the first time they fought. My impression, Wilder has improved substantially since that fight. He's had good experience. He's had a lot better fights post that fight than he had in the lead up to that fight. He's improved as a fighter. He's become a bit more disciplined. He's become a bit more versatile. There's more tools in his armory. Stiverne, he's been very inactive. I don't know how old Stiverne is, but he must be touching 40. He's taken this fight at late notice, coming in at late notice against Deontay Wilder. I know he's been training for another fight, but Wilder's a big fight. big fight to take at late notice. And the only fight he's had in between his defeat to Wilder was a tough 10 rounder against Derek Rossi, where Stiverne was dropped and came through that fight by the narrowest of margins, the skin of his teeth. So for me, going to be very, very hard for Stiverne to reverse the form there with Deontay Wilder. You know, Wilder's a guy who I think will be a lot better fighter than the guy Stiverne fought first time round. Stiverne, there's every reason to believe he could be worse. He's definitely going to be older. He's definitely going to be more inactive. He doesn't look to me like the kind of guy who's always stayed in the gym and always stayed in great shape between fights. So I think that's going to be a tough ask for Bermane Stiverne. If Wilder fights Dominic Breazeale, you know, Breazeale's a likeable fighter. There's a lot to like about Breazeale. He's a big guy. He's got an excellent chin. He was involved in a great fight against Izu Ugono. But we kind of know what Dominic Breazeale is at this stage of his career. He's not an elite level puncher, and he's just not an elite level fighter. Breazeale's one of those guys who, for me, has the potential to hang around in the top 20 of the heavyweight division for some time. You know, he's got certain attributes. He's going to be involved in good fights. He's a good opponent, and he can pick up the odd scalp. You know, it don't surprise me if Dominic Breazeale turns into the next generation's Tony Thompson. You know, someone who's in and around the division for a long time. But I don't think Dominic Breazeale is ever going to be an elite fighter. He didn't come close to running around against Anthony Joshua, and I do think a guy like Deontay Wilder is going to have far too much for Dominic Breazeale. So, you know, I feel a bit sorry for Wilder. He's going to take a late notice opponent in all likelihood, and he'll get criticised for fighting another guy who isn't what the public want to see. You know, but one thing I will say in Wilder's favour, he made the fight with Povetkin. He made the fight with Luis Ortiz. Whether you think those fights should continue or not, let's agree that at the time of Wilder looking to, you know, getting ready to take those fights, some sort of scandal arose, rightly or wrongly, about Povetkin. Some sort of scandal arose, rightly or wrongly, about Luis Ortiz. Um, and, you know, it is what it is. The fights obviously aren't going to happen. So there we go. I'm trying to think what else I can talk about now. I guess we've covered really some of the major news. I saw already Hearn talking about Hughie Fury versus David Allen. I think they're probably going to want to pitch Hughie Fury in a higher level than that. But you know, the heavyweight division is going to be live at the minute. Hughie Fury, for me, he's got one of those resumes where he's done very well against Joseph Parker, but technically it's a loss. You know, on BoxRec it's a loss. And if you actually say what's Hughie Fury's best win, it's a guy like Fred Cassie. It's a guy like Dominic Wynn. Maybe it's Rudenko. Rudenko's probably his best win. So really, you're having to say Hughie Fury's best win is a top 50 level opponent. Um, you know, it's hard to say that Hughie Fury has definitely got a better win than the likes of a David Price or a Derek Chisora. He's probably actually got worse wins than Derek Chisora. He's probably got worse wins. He's definitely got worse wins for me than Dillian White. Um, you know, so there's a thriving scene there. You've got David Allen versus Lenroy Thomas. You've got Ian Lewison versus Lenroy Thomas. You've got David Price's return. You've got Chisora back in the mix. Dillian White's definitely looking for an opponent. You got a British title fight. I believe that might even be tomorrow. You know, Gary Cornish versus Sam Sexton. That's not a great fight. I think Sexton, for me, possibly wins that fight. Um, you know, Cornish is probably the superior boxer out of the two. He can use range, but you know, from what I hear, I saw Cornish getting heavily dropped earlier on in his career by a journeyman. You know, I've heard some things about him sparring. They might be true, they may not be true, but I don't believe Cornish has got too much punch resistance. Sexton's no world beater. He's another guy who's had his own problems, been inactive. But it wouldn't surprise me if Sexton wins that fight. And then you know you've got a decent British scene. You know you've got Dave Allen Thomas. If Dave Allen comes through that, Lewis and Joyce, the winner of that's well in the mix. You got Nathan Gorman progressing very nicely. Daniel Dubois progressing very nicely. As I say, guys like Chisora and Price getting back into the mix. Dillian White looking for an opponent. So you really do have some decent names there. And you know, Hughie Fury for me, there's no need to rush Hughie. He's just turned 23 years of age, and he doesn't have that kind of British Commonwealth level win on his opponent. You look at Eubank Jr. He took that big loss to Saunders, and they've actually handled it quite well. They dropped him down a level. They got him fighting respectable names, top 50 names, but essentially domestic Commonwealth lower European names. She's Chudinov, Blackwell, Spike O'Sullivan. You know, those sort of guys, the heavyweight equivalents for me are what you should do with Hughie. Try and get him out, try and get him active, try and keep him in the public eye, try and get him some decent wins against that level of opponent, and then maybe it's not such a massive jump up in class. You never want a fighter to jump from a top 100 opponent straight to a top 5 opponent. You know, you want it to be a bit more gradual, in my opinion, when you're building a fighter. So anyway, so live scene. I wanted to do a little bit of a video. People asking for my thoughts on Wilder Stiverne, on Fury Briggs, and Hughie Fury's return. Hopefully, I've given some in a nutshell points on all of those. And yeah, I guess there's my take on the performance enhancing drug situation. But yeah, I hope the Lewis Ortiz Wilder fight doesn't happen. Tony Bellew has always been extremely loud with his opinions on performance enhancing drugs. And you know what? Sometimes you got to applaud Tony Bellew, and fair play to him for shining a light on some of this recent stuff. You know, the idea that it's only the top 20 fighters who, who are being tested in Britain, or something of that nature, and the idea that the website doesn't work on all laptops, the idea that Bellew had to go out and buy a specific laptop in order to make the website work is deeply concerning to me. It's deeply concerning to me because, whilst Tony Bellew went out of his way and decided to buy a new laptop, perhaps not everyone will make that decision, and it's kind of a bit farcical that we're talking about what type of laptop you have in the context of how serious this is. Let me know your thoughts, people. We've discussed a lot of topics in this video, so hit me with your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed it, do take the time to hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, or you haven't done so before, for whatever reason, please do take the time to subscribe. Many thanks indeed for tuning in.